It's, well, that and many other platforms are becoming steadily worse. They need to have an integrated point where an equalization comes intact, and a certain replicated speeds and or organizations that are causing these issues need to be stopped altogether. We need to find safety, especially for kids. We can't find that safety if we're having an unstable way of motivating ourselves and having an unstable way of others pretty much putting it more into an unactive scenario. People got to use their senses, their minds.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 46. Blue, how are you?
I'm good today, Mike.
I know we're going to have a big show today on 46. And for those of you who missed 45, stop what you're doing after you watch this, of course, and go back and watch 45. The biggest announcement we've ever made, one of the biggest announcements ever made in American history, was made on this very show on episode. But I know we got a big show planned today for episode 46. What are we going to talk about today, Blue?
Well, first main thing we need to discuss about is TikTok. Now, everyone, they may or may not like it, depending. But for those who do, go farther in your database streams and farther in the information and find out what you're dealing with when you're on this platform. Because there are associations and distributors out there that launder it for money as well as human trafficking.
Yeah, that's important stuff. It's, I've been on that for a little while now, but I'm glad we're going to address that today. Hey, before we get going here on 46, please make sure you go and subscribe, follow, all those other fancy words to make sure you're getting, and click on notifications too. You want to get the information as soon as we put it out, and we want you to get that information as soon as we put it out. Blue, a lot of stuff to talk about today. Let's get right into it.
Yeah, the game of human trafficking on social network platforms. One of the major concerns is TikTok. And they play these games, getting these people's pictures, getting their information, self-analyzing who and what they are, but you have no idea the perception of what's going on. Even in China itself, it is getting bad. They feel that buying trafficked women and children gets less jail time than buying illegal plants or animals. Don't think it's just a physical thing that they utilize. And I am not just stating them, it's happening all over the world. But there are certain rectified codes on a negative stance from that sector and or coordinated other sectors that need to stop. Because of what they are dealing with, they are utilizing online as well. Those who deal with these trafficking, those that want to actually utilize money and use your information for that money. It's another way to traffic. It doesn't have to be just as a personal factor thing. It can be as a formational code of just using your identity for themselves. Now, they had stated on the platform of IGM to protect children from online sexual exploitation through TikTok. Now, if this is the case and I ain't seeing this, then why do they have such a high concern still dealing with this platform? If they're helping to fight against them, helping to fight to protect these children, I want to see more of that and less of the stupidity. Because this is very, very vital for people to understand and know of. TikTok could be a good thing. It could play out funny videos and stuff. But when it starts doing things like this, that can harm everyone.
The people that I've talked to in my life in recent past, I'm speaking of the past 3 years or so, when they've shared TikTok or the use of TikTok or shared TikTok videos or whatever on other platforms, I would state my objection. I would kindly ask the person to consider not sharing that material. And unfortunately, in where I stand, anyway, I find it quite objectionable. And I've lost some friends over it. And if they were not really my friend, if they chose TikTok over their friendship with me, but I've had other people had their eyes opened. So that was an interesting point. I won't share TikTok. You won't see TikTok on any of my platforms or any of my channels. I won't even use a repurposed image from TikTok. And that's the thing people need to understand, because it's evil on multiple levels. If you think that China doesn't own TikTok, you're wrongly mistaken here. ByteDance owns TikTok. The number 3 guy, if you would, in ByteDance is in charge of all the social and communication in the Chinese Communist Party, in the government. He's like 2 people away from the, Xi Jinping, the leader in China there. China's a lot different with TikTok in their own country. Children are not allowed on TikTok, and they're not really allowed on TikTok at night, like from 10 p.m. to like 6 a.m. And the information is very filtered. It's not the same TikTok that we get here in this country. It's totally different. TikTok over there is used for educational purposes. It's used as a news platform. And alarming enough, a lot of people use TikTok and social media as their respective news platforms here in our country. Yet it's not controlled by regular news people. It's controlled by mainstream media. And now we're finding out how much intrusiveness TikTok has. They're controlling what you see. They'd rather... What's the old Roman thing? Give them bread and circuses, and you could do whatever you want. You could steal all the money. You could do... That's what I think we're saying here. So is this just history repeating itself? Is this the same old good versus evil when it comes to TikTok, China, and human trafficking?
Well, that and many other platforms are becoming steadily worse. They need to have an integrated point where an equalization comes intact, and a certain replicated speeds and or organizations that are causing these issues need to be stopped altogether. We need to find safety, especially for kids. We can't find that safety if we're having an unstable way of motivating ourselves and having an unstable way of others pretty much putting it more into an unactive scenario. People got to use their senses, their minds. Stop doing stupid things or proactively thinking on this unstable term for yourself.
We've go ahead. I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Go
ahead.
We've talked in the past about human trafficking. I know when we talk about the 17th letter in the alphabet, that's been exposed there a long time ago. We're waiting on the Epstein Black Book to drop. We're waiting on a lot of stuff that we know has happened, and I'm sure things are happening behind the scenes. We talked a lot about the 17th letter in 45, and again, folks, if you haven't seen that yet, go back and watch episode 45. You're going to thank me for that. My thing here is this just another step? The exposing of this, Congress, in the House at least, voting to ban TikTok in the United States unless it has the ownership here in the US is kind of like their compromise, I guess. And I feel good about the people who have been stepping forward to say they would be interested in buying the US product. But I also heard Kevin O'Leary, he goes by Mr. Wonderful. You may recognize him from Shark Tank. And so saying that he's definitely interested. He's put together a group to buy the U.S. rights to TikTok, but only if it comes with the original algorithms, and he's going to cut the Chinese government out. Because what people don't understand is if you're from China, you own a Chinese business, the Chinese Communist Party owns part of that business. They're a partner with you. That's what allows you to do business with and through China. That's why it's so alarming when the NBA and Disney and all these people are courting China. I get it. They got 1 billion viewers. But are all billion digesting your product? Are all billion? You're just looking for numbers and for exposure. And I object to that when it comes to our national security, when it comes to human trafficking. Do we think that if we were able to cut out the Chinese ownership through ByteDance of TikTok and made it a US based thing, do you feel, Blue, that that would cut into their ability to utilize this tool for human trafficking?
Yes, cut off the major negative factions that would be utilizing these kinds of things going on, including the trafficking, including money, and even including using your information for them. So that way your identity is pretty much doubled as another identity. We don't need that. And humans have their own rights still. They always fallen away. So if China's going to be proactive about affairs, they need to dedicate that learning not to have certain organizations slip in, cause these issues, and malfunction the placement codes for everywhere else. We're all going to learn to utilize working together eventually. Otherwise, down it goes the drain, and we don't want that.
You know,
if I'd have said one thing.
Go ahead.
Sorry. If I'd have said one thing in draining a swamp, what I mean by that, on my personal note, drain the stupidity of what's being activated amongst mankind and make something better in its stead. And that doesn't just go for the USA. That goes for all countries.
It's a fine line we walk, I would guess, as a everyday Joe or somebody who can make a difference. Because if enough people make a difference, I don't know if you saw the movie Ants or Bug's Life or whatever, there's this critical point in those movies where they figure out that the grasshoppers who are stealing all their food, this is a cartoon animation thing from like the 90s. I guess I'm showing my age, but they realize that they outnumber the grasshoppers, the ants. There's like 1 million ants, and they're working for the 8 grasshoppers. Well, it's the same thing here. And they finally realize that, hey, there's more of us than there are of them. We could just overtake them in a sense if we wanted to, if we all get together. I'm guessing at this point that it would be smart for most people to contact their members of Congress, to contact their local senators and urge them to vote in a way, especially if you're in a blue area, get them to vote for these things. However, there's a very fine line here because we don't want to give the government control of social media like the deep state has the past several years. They've been quoting and deplatforming people for disinformation or misinformation just because it doesn't feed the narrative. We're talking about in the arm, we're talking about the 17th letter, we're talking about human trafficking. All these things get knocked down or knocked off, and they'll even deplatform people. Now they're jailing people for doing things like this in other parts of the world. They want to destroy us from within, and they want to destroy our Constitution, and they want to use social media to control our lives. Is that the only thing I can do, Blue, you think? Is contact my representatives, contact my senators, and try to get a groundswell of people around me doing the same thing? Because there's more of us than there are of them.
Well, we all could suppose to motivate an initial vote standard to maintaining what algorithm input fees need to be placed out there when it deals with the digital points of effect online. Find safety, find stability, decommission the unstable points of effect, and commission something that will motivate it forward. We each can make votes on that, and that might be something that humans should make a stand for, and substandard laws to equalizing better terms. So they are not getting negative justification speeds dealing with the trafficking or the money or the even negative activated effects of what they deal with back and forth. Network is vital for mankind, but it has to be stable. Creating the laws for that stable has to come.
You know, it's a shame because it's a shame we have to talk about this, but I'm glad we are, because I'm about making a difference. I'm about you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. I'm trying to identify problems, and we do. I think you've done that here, Boo, to a major extent. And we've talked about human trafficking in the past. It's a cumbersome thing. We could spend all show on it, and I don't want to because I know we've got a lot of other things we want to talk about. Speaking of which, can we talk about the SCP Foundation now?
Absolutely. SCP Foundation, SCP-709, Eye of the Forest. Ever heard of a setup of an actual tree house that upon that receptacle you can look out the window and see an alternated dimension or alternated version of another domain itself? Now, what I currently went up into this, and I believe that this is considered safe because he will be asking for that, is a spherical treehouse assembled from a kit provided by a certain sector of effect company in Vancouver Island. Furnish a small apartment suitable for overnighting. Now it gets interesting, like I said, the person, they look out the window, period of more than 3 to 5 minutes, they'll begin to see what appears to be an alternate version of the forest inhabitants. Doubles the size of the legs or wings of animals. The alternated dimensions are real. This type of spherical unit itself places that visionary mode upon that dimension. But here's where it gets interesting, is the fact that once they have placed the objects, because these people get hallucinations and sometimes it won't end up well because they cannot intake of what they're seeing. Most people, the observers, they'll deal with certain activated events after an explanation. But when you try to put a recording device or a camera receptacle like that, what they've seen from their own sight will not be activated upon an actual camera or extra dimensional photography form or something that has a mirror effect, because they have an activated portal through that type of treehouse itself that will only be able to be seen through the eyes.
This brings me to two things that I've seen recently on the internet, and I think these will coincide with what we're talking about here, and I want to ask you about those two things. One is, I've seen time and time again, I think we've talked about it before, about beings coming from other dimensions or other times. And if I understand from our past discussions, that's based on frequencies of what we can perceive as well, because we can only perceive at a certain levels or certain frequencies. And there could be, in other words, folks, there could be an entire universe around you coinciding with what you have right now, but you can't perceive that. You don't have the ability to perceive that, so you don't see it. It doesn't happen. In other words, there could be somebody standing right next to me right now in this video, but the video and myself, we can't comprehend that. We can't perceive that right now. The second thing is there's a TV show, Skinwalker Ranch, and there's a lot of things that happen at this particular place out west, and it sounds like interdimensional beings that can cross through at any time. Is that what we're saying? It's not the SCP-704 itself, it's the location of where that is, that for some reason that's like at that portal, that's like at that difference in dimensions. Is that what we're saying?
Well, yes and no, because that treehouse itself can be moved, and I believe it may have already been moved. It is more of a cloaking after effect of seeing through another mirror into another dimension because of that portal that's already there through the looking glass.
So it's not that specific site.
Looking glass.
It's that treehouse formation itself.
Yes,
it's not the site.
Think about Alice in Wonderland and Looking Glass. Looking through the looking glass, an actual mirror. Now, I mean, it can't really step through it, but you could see through it. And it's alternated in a dimensional code. But with Alice, you could step through it. But it is singular. This is more of a site activation and then a portalized effect. But it still coincides through alternated to other dimensional frequency drives, being able to see through that perimeter. Only through the eyes, though.
Crazy.
Like I said, they have problems with cameras and other types of technologies when it comes to trying to record it.
You know, the other SCP that I know we're going to talk about here briefly kind of intrigued me because I thought, what is that? Tell me more about Dangerous Curves, SCP-704.
Yes, it's a winding road breaking off, connecting to State Highway 96. Of course, they're not going to tell you what national forest it is. More or less, if it's a winding road, more or less articulated, it could be through more mountainous regions. It does not appear on any conventional electronic maps, and satellite surveillance is very difficult by inability to focus on the affected area. And I can explain to you right now because it has an alternated redox dimensional wave that polarizes into between two frequencies. And that frequency disrupts the frequencies most humans have through their type of technologies itself. It has a passive. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, is this something that was constructed under certain specific, like how did these courses didn't just happen? I don't know if it was environmental, if that's the only way they could cut a road through there, or was this, does this appear strictly because it was created to specifically be that way?
I will explain. It's like an ultra-dimensional relay burst that has a passive and an active phase. The passive stage can only be observed by those traveling by foot. During the passive stage, it is a winding static road littered with the remains of vehicles. So those, when they see that through their eyes only, they're going to look at a winding road littered with the remains of vehicles.
Is this something kind of like the treehouse where you'll see the things you're going to be witnessing are probably from different dimensions?
Well, let me explain. So remains of the vehicles, they're not observed when it's in its active phase. When it's in its active phase, it's when a person is driving. And then they have someone next to them. So when they're driving, they end up being like they're literally taking over. They become hysterical. They start having periods of a delusion. And when this happens, it usually ends up in some type of crash, and then remotely ends up in that person not even remembering it, and the other the passenger itself would end up being decapacitated.
Mm.
And then reverses that effect when it goes back into its other stage. So this itself, it has a dimensional topography effect that pretty much pushes the person's mindset backwards on the time loops that is set for as well. So the passengers show a uniform negative reaction to the road. They exhibit anxiety, paranoia, and fear. And dealing with the first sign of the active phase is usually excited disposition on the part of the driver. So the road becomes more challenging, and the driver will begin to declare how much fun the road is and proceed to keep going. Now the passenger is freaking out, watching the driving skills. And in a way, it's funny, in a way it's not, because it provides a dangerous aspect. Could severely pose problems and creates a re-loop in the interdimensional frequency drives through that area. Your re-looping speeds of co-crashes or proactive forms of someone being a disposition from themselves or reenacted into that. I would consider it Euclid. I wouldn't consider it a safe active form until people have actually understood this a bit better.
It brings me back to, and I know this is going to, again, age me as well. There's an old surfing song. Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys covered it as well. I think it's called Dead Man's Curve. So I wonder if there's more situations kind of like this that we're not aware of yet? Or is this a one-off, one specific place, one specific time thing?
Oh, there are several types of dimensioning reloop signature codes. And depending on those alpha waves, whatever had happened through a timeline event or whatever was self-diagnosed to an alternated dimension and added to that. This one in particular just ends up into someone being manipulated through the mind and or two dimensionings coexisting into one or a break off from another point of effect.
You know, it's very interesting because I think this kind of might play into the next SCP we want to talk about, the Tunnel of Infinite Possibility.
Yep. SCP is an incomplete site in Site 19, one of the SCP Foundation's tunnels that connects to SCP containment wing with Lambda laboratory wing. Tunnel is 3 meters in diameter, 50 meters long, and very approximately 5 meters underground. Because its incomplete nature, though SCP-903 is an empty concrete tunnel that contains no piping, wiring, or any of the utility equipment. It also contains an old rail system that consists of a single monorail that spans the entire length. Now, what gets interesting about this, because allegedly a long time ago, certain site people who work through the Foundation, that they bring certain other SCPs back and forth through this system. They were only supposed to do 1 or 2 at a time. And they screwed up quite a long time ago and started putting in numerous amounts of SCP through the trail system. And it caused a negative influx upon the polarity streams itself. And it pretty much takes away any SCP that tries to go through it now. A certain letter comes in instead. And this handwritten letter, unlike the SCPs that go back and forth between it, and usually it's the ones that have gone beforehand, before the actual incident itself. They would either disappear or something would incapacitate upon the algorithm codes, and the scientists would have to deal with that. But the handwritten note, it says when it does come back, it doesn't get screwed up. When this happens, it states, even the greatest minds can lose their inspiration. Can you please help an artist in desperation? Very much so that they may have messed up some type of space-time continuum redox code amongst this tunnel. A certain entity itself in here may be calling out to an inspirational mode to re-maintaining things. Tracing the source, hopefully, of what actually compensated that note in the first place. Because believe it or not, when they actually correled these SCPs before this incident happened, this type of being and or entity that controlled that various tunnel itself had learned through those receptacles and then gained certain knowledge.
Wow.
But it did fuck up the space-time continuum and a certain redox effect when they had dealt with that. It couldn't intake that much at once.
You know, I hear the name Tunnel of Infinite Possibility, and it sounds to me like not necessarily a portal, but a way to get to different dimensions. Is that's what we're saying here, right?
Yes, a very big possibility, but the way they proacted it wasn't right, and it did not come at a good stance at the time. But there are ways to elevate that and find maybe possibly through this note, through another note sent to it to see what this entity would really decide and want and evaluate that from there.
Crazy stuff. I'm a fan of a show on TV, and I know it's a cartoon, but it's out now, and it's called Rick and Morty, and it really blows my mind that, you know, we're talking about these things, and there are people out there who are also talking about these things, and it blows my mind. Glad we talk about the SCP. I think it's important stuff for people to be aware of, at least. Let's talk about your position with the Space Force and the Federation. What do you have to report from there?
Well, one of the other things that need to be discussed about China and the affairs going on is undedicated effects that push a scene outwards that does not need to be placed. So-called China could attack U.S. satellites from the moon, warns a general in Space Force. We won't deal with this. And if that's the case, there are certain organizations out there that want to go proactive and cut off the terms of effect for the U.S. That is not going to be good on peace treaty protocol. Number one, President Tsai had already or should have already acted with the protocols for the Federation Peace Treaty. That goes to the force. That goes to the distribution of the scenes of, yes, the U.S., because we're a part of that, and all the other countries. When we're dealing with this, and they want to take out the U.S. satellites from the moon, what does this say to us? Don't go against something that wants to be an active causeway forward. So for President Tsai and those dealing with China, like just even with the organizations and all the other deplorable things that don't need to happen, maintain yourselves, those are codes of equity, and move forward. Enough for this. We've got to find a better stance. And going against terms of effect for this will not stand on our causeway. So if you want to proact with the Federation and actually engage with the treaty like you were supposed to, I believe, 4 years ago, then you got to stop acting out in this scenario. This is a concern for U.S. This is a concern for Space Force and others. We don't need our integrity shot down, and neither does anybody else on this planet.
Yeah, it's big stuff, because I don't think a lot of people really fully comprehend what our everyday lives would be without satellite, without electricity. We just look at third world countries, and that's not what we need to be. They're trying to make it that way. But that's another show. That's another issue. That's another time.
Yep. And I have a couple more things.
Please.
NASA. I have a couple of things dealing with Elon Musk and what they put on false terms to the news. You know, several times over, they said to SpaceX that his SpaceX star units had been exploding or causing malfunctions. That's not the case. That's not what's really going on. And they're pulling out there from a different news network streams this on several accounts. This is not true. What's really going on is they're making it. The landing went well. The crew made it. You know, a safe touchdown. That's reality. There are two different types of news going out there. Mainstream media fake news needs to stop, because the man knows what he's doing. He runs a really big organization, and he has the smarts to utilize it. And one more thing, DUMBS, and most people may not be aware of this, but there are underground military bases that deal with bunkers that have products of food and other distributions that are good for mankind, that have no chemical byproducts. They have no junctioning modes of effects that would affect you. Underground in certain areas, under bunkers in certain areas, provided for certain negative, main elites and individuals and organizations. They're getting good food. Humans are getting the crappy shit. Look it up. You're all getting non-entity type of deal. You're all getting genetically modified organisms placed in your byproducts. Look at what you're eating in fast food restaurants. Look closely. It's not even considered cow.
Wow.
This is a concern too. They are hiding things that should not be happening. Another thing is the flooding with the flooding gates with these immigrants is getting worse. And it's getting to the point now that they can eclipse almost the whole entire country of the USA in one go. If this keeps happening, we don't need a flooding gate. We need an activated event where everyone is working together through their own sectors and maintaining to one activated frame. Not something that's going to take over and annihilate the countries. For shame on you all.
Well, I like the way you bring it right out. I like the way you're direct, and I like the way you give us concrete information here.
ET of the week, Siron Fai, ancient friendly, but cautious over newcomers until acknowledged. Semi-intact InnerLands planetary coordinators, Re-Locators for Higher Dimensional Fairies Molecular to the factions of elementi, earth, Spacial, fire, and water. Siron Fai are associated with directives providing extra support and location defenses for travels between both external and internal Fai Affairs. Bigger cousins of the flying smaller cousins, light blue translucent skin variations, non-hair follicles, and agile, thin body structure. Able to see at night via night vision. Diets consist normally of specified Agarthan insects and foliage, sometimes smaller animals. Heights range from 6 to 9 feet to 7 to 9 feet in length.
Wow. Good guy, bad guy, in between.
Friendly.
Okay.
They're proactive turns, and they work on a digital mainframe between two realms that go between their smaller cousins and themselves, which are smaller cousins of which most humans perceive and see as fairies. And if you're lucky, yes, they are real. They have been photographed before. People have seen videos of these species.
Wow. And just like that, we are out of time, folks. Another full action-packed show today. Blue, thank you very much for bringing the heat. Folks, reminder, click on like, follow, subscribe, notifications, all that stuff. And we'll see you next time in 47. And go back and look at 45. Thanks again, Blue.
Thank you.